There is no body of humorous folk literature more widely disseminated among Yiddish-speaking Jews than the stories about the fools, or sages, as they are scoffingly called, of Chelm. There are, of course, fools and fools, but in the Jewish folk fancy, the fools of Chelm represent the crème de la crème in simpletons. They have even entered into the Yiddish language. When a Jew refers to a pretentious, foolish person, likely as not he will say of him ironically, "Just look at him, a regular Chelmul Chacham." What is Chelm? It is a real town in Poland, like Gotham in England and Schildberg in Germany. These three towns have one thing in common. For some unaccountable reason, they were elected in irreverent folklore to serve as the centers of all innocent stupidity. The historical origin of the foolish stories about the inhabitants of all three places is closely linked. Which of them came first chronologically is like debating which came first, the chicken or the egg. However, we do know one fact, that the tales about the fools of Schildberg were translated in 1597 from the German into Yiddish, and enjoyed enormous popularity in Central and Eastern Europe. Whether there already existed before that time a body of humorous Yiddish stories about the fools of Chelm, we have no way of knowing. It is reasonable, though, to conjecture that, prior to that time, there must have been in circulation among Jews many jokes about fools, but there was no unifying peg on which to hang them. Conceivably, the Schildberger tales may have served as a model for the adoption of Chelm as a town of Jewish fools. Since then, many a story about fools has conveniently been ascribed to the inhabitants of Chelm. The Chelm stories have their own flavor and coloration, differing considerably from the Schildberg and Gotham stories. They not only have Jewish settings and, to some extent, are an index to Jewish character, customs, and manners, but they also possess many facets of Jewish irony and wit. Unquestionably, they constitute an original body of folk humor. When God created the world, so it is said, he sent out an angel with a bag of foolish souls, with instructions to distribute them equally all over the world, one fool per town. But the angel's bag broke, and all the souls spilled out onto the same spot. They built a settlement where they landed. The town is known as Chelm. Two sages of Chelm went out for a walk. One carried an umbrella, the other didn't. Suddenly it began to rain. "Open your umbrella, quick!" suggested the one without an umbrella. "It won't help," answered the other. "What do you mean it won't help? It will protect us from the rain." "It's no use, the umbrella is as full of holes as a sieve." "Then why did you take it along in the first place?" "I didn't think it would rain." Once on a Hanukkah night, the snow fell all evening. It covered the whole of Chelm like a silver tablecloth. The moon shone, the stars twinkled, the snow shimmered like pearls and diamonds. Of all the fools of Chelm, the most famous were its 7 elders. Because they were the village's oldest and greatest fools, they ruled in Chelm. They had white beards and high foreheads from too much thinking. That evening the 7 elders were sitting and pondering, wrinkling their foreheads. The city was in need of money, and they did not know where to get it. Suddenly the oldest of them all, Gronim the Great Fool, exclaimed, "The snow is silver!" "I see pearls in the snow," another shouted. "And I see diamonds," a third called out. It became clear to the elders of Chelm that a treasure had fallen from the sky. But soon they began to worry. The people of Chelm liked to go walking, and they would most certainly trample the treasure. What was to be done? Silly Tudras had an idea. "Let's send a messenger to knock on all the windows, and let the people know that they must remain in their houses until all the silver, all the pearls, and all the diamonds are safely gathered up." For a while the elders were satisfied. They rubbed their hands in approval of the clever idea. But then Dopey Lekish called out in consternation, "The messenger himself will trample the treasure." The elders realized that Lekish was right, and again they wrinkled their high foreheads in an effort to solve the problem. "I've got it!" cried Shmerel the ox. Tell us, pleaded the elders. "The messenger must not go on foot. He must be carried on a table so that his feet will not tread on the precious snow." Everybody was delighted with Shmerel the ox's solution, and the elders, clapping their hands, admired their own wisdom. The elders immediately sent to the kitchen for Gimple the errand boy, and stood him on a table. Now who was going to carry the table? It was lucky that in the kitchen there was Tretel the cook, Beryl the potato peeler, Eukel the salad mixer, and Yontel, who was in charge of the community goat. All four were ordered to lift up the table on which Gimple stood. Each one took hold of a leg. On top stood Gimple, grasping a wooden hammer with which to tap on the villagers' windows. Off they went. At each window Gimple knocked with the hammer and called out, "No one leave your house tonight. A treasure has fallen from the sky, and it is forbidden to step on it." The people of Chelm obeyed the elders and remained in their houses all night. Meanwhile the elders themselves sat up trying to figure out how best to make use of the treasure once it had been gathered up. Silly Tudras proposed that they sell it and buy a goose which lays golden eggs. Thus the community would be provided with a steady income. Dopey Lekish had another idea. Why not buy eyeglasses that make things look bigger for all the inhabitants of Chelm? Then the houses, the streets, the stores would all look bigger. And of course, if Chelm looked bigger, then it would be bigger. It would no longer be a village, but a big city. There were other equally clever ideas. But while they were weighing their various plans, morning came and the sun rose. The elders looked out of the window, and alas, they saw that the snow had been trampled. The heavy boots of the table carriers had destroyed the treasure. A teacher once lived on top of the hill on Synagogue Street in Chelm, and he was a great schlemazel. Everything turned for him, as the saying goes, buttered side down. It was therefore with a nagging envy that he watched the rich people of Chelm having all the good things in life, while he, poor schlemazel, had to dine daily on a dry crust of bread and an onion. One day he said wistfully to his wife, "My heart, I can no longer endure bread and onion. It's already crawling out of my gullet. It's about time we had a little pleasure, just like the rich. Let's put money by for a cake, the kind we tasted at the wedding of the Rabbi's daughter, full of honey and delicious raisins and almonds." The idea pleased his wife no end. "Good, I have a plan," she said eagerly. "You know my grandmother's large trunk with the 4 wheels up in the garret? Let's make a little hole in it. Every Friday afternoon before you go to the mikveh, you drop in a kopeck. I will do the same before I light the Sabbath candles. In that way, by the time Shavuot comes around, we will have enough money to make a cake that will melt in your mouth." On the first Friday, the teacher and his wife dutifully dropped into the trunk a kopeck each. But when the second Friday came around, the teacher, who was a profound scholar, thought the matter over in this way. "Fool that I am! What's the earthly use of dropping in kopeck after kopeck in this trunk? Surely my wife, that faithful old soul, will keep dropping in kopecks regularly, so that we'll soon have money for a wonderful cake without my contributions. I can use the money for other things." So the teacher stopped his contributions. Now, his wife was so smart, she could even have been a Rebbitzin. "God gave you a head, use it," she admonished herself. "After all, I'm only a poor Yidena. Must I bother my head with kopecks? That's a man's job. I have enough to trouble as it is to make ends meet on the 10 rubles a month that schlemazel gives me for household expenses. There are important things for which I can use my kopecks. In any case, what do we need so many kopecks for? The kopecks Mendel drops in will be enough, I'm sure." So she, too, stopped her contributions. Several days before Shavuot, Mendel the teacher and his wife decided it was time to open the trunk and take out all the kopecks. "Ha, what a cake that'll be!" exclaimed Mendel rapturously. "It will have all the tastes of the Garden of Eden." and Mendel sighed contentedly and smacked his lips as if he had already eaten the cake. With great ceremony, Mendel unlocked the trunk. Carefully, he lifted the lid and peered inside. "Gewalt!" he cried, turning pale. "We're robbed!" His wife quickly stuck her head into the trunk and exclaimed, "They left us only 2 kopecks, the rascals!" Then suddenly a dark thought clouded her mind. "Schlemazel!" she cried. "Tell me the truth. Did you drop more than 1 kopeck into the trunk?" "What do you take me for, a fool?" retorted Mendel. "Of course not. I figured your kopecks would be enough. Now that you have mentioned it, my fine shrew, what happened to your kopecks?" "My kopecks? What do you mean, my kopecks? If you were honest enough to put in yours, we wouldn't have needed mine." At this both became inflamed with anger at each other, and they set to with a right good will, so that their cries could be heard all the way down Synagogue Street. In the scuffle, Mendel lost his balance and fell into the trunk, pulling his wife with him. And before you could say Constantinople, the lid had snapped shut on them. However, in their frantic struggle to get out, they set the trunk in motion on its 4 wheels. The door of their little cottage being open, for it was a balmy day, the trunk rolled through the doorway with the greatest of ease and down the hill into Synagogue Street. "Help! Help!" Unearthly voices issued from the trunk as it rolled toward the synagogue. Women shrieked, children bawled, and all the dogs of Chelm ran barking madly after it. "It surely must be a demon," commented the chief sage, as the trunk whirled by him and he heard the muffled cries inside it. The trunk's wild journey came suddenly to an end in front of the synagogue. By this time all of Chelm had gathered around it, gaping with curiosity. "Fetch Burl the locksmith," ordered the chief sage in a voice of authority. "All together we'll drive this demon out." And so, after chanting appropriate incantations, the lock was pried open by Burl the locksmith, and, more dead than alive, out peered Mendel the teacher and his wife. "Heaven preserve us, look who's here!" the people of Chelm cried. The runaway trunk had so frightened the people of Chelm that in response to the general clamor, the chief sage was obliged to call a special meeting of all the sages of Chelm. After long and judicious deliberation, they resolved that never again must such an unseemly thing happen in their town. To make their decision effective and binding forever upon all future generations of Chelm, they passed the following laws. 1. That every door in Chelm had to be provided with a high threshold. 2. That no teacher could ever live on Synagogue Street. 3. That henceforth no trunk could have any wheels. In the town of Chelm there lived a man whose name was Rabbi. He was a sage, but a restless one. He had the wanderlust in his blood, and always dreamed of seeing the world. But since he was a sage, he was poor, so he could never afford to travel abroad like the rich merchants in the town. One day a Chelm merchant returned from a visit to Warsaw. That day, and every day thereafter for a week, one could hear nothing else talked about in Chelm except the wonders of Warsaw that the merchant had described so vividly. No one listened more raptly than Reb Selig. From that time on, he walked about like one possessed, filled with only one desire, to see Warsaw. He could neither eat nor sleep nor find rest for himself. His wife was perplexed. She didn't know what had come over her Selig. One morning he arose and said to her with a faraway look in his eyes, "I've got to go to Warsaw." "What for?" "I hear it's a wonderful city." "But you have no money." "I'll walk." "But you'll wear out your shoes." "I'll walk barefoot and carry them in my hand." "You've gone out of your mind, Selig." "I've got to see Warsaw," Reb Selig insisted. So he put some bread and cheese in a knapsack and threw it over his shoulder. He took up his oak stick, and, with his shoes in his hands, he started out for the great city. Reb Selig hastened along, borne on wings. He didn't mind at all that he was barefoot, and that the sharp pebbles pricked the soles of his feet. He sang all the way, and was filled with joy, thinking that soon his eyes would feast on the wonders of Warsaw. When the sun stood high in the sky, Reb Selig began to feel the pangs of hunger. He sat down in the shade of a tree at a fork of the road. He ate his noonday meal of bread and cheese. Then, feeling drowsy, he decided to take a short nap in order to refresh himself. But before doing that, he wanted to make sure that he would continue on the right road when he awoke. "Now let me see," he said to himself. "I'm at the fork of two roads. One goes to Warsaw and the other goes back to Chelm. I must make sure to take the one to Warsaw and not the one back to Chelm." So he took his shoes and placed them on the road with the toes facing Warsaw. "When I awake, I'll be sure to take the right road," he thought. Pleased with his cleverness, he stretched his length on the grass and went to sleep. Aye, what a sleep that was! It was the sleep of the blessed, like that of the patriarch Jacob when he saw angels in his dream. And while Reb Selig slept so soundly, so sweetly, a peasant came jogging along in his cart. When the peasant saw the pair of shoes in the road, he said to himself, "What luck! Here's a pair of shoes sitting like orphans in the road." So he stopped his horse, climbed off the cart, and picked up the shoes. "Black cholera take them," he murmured. "They're not shoes. They're so full of holes, they're sieves." So he dropped the shoes, but in dropping them, they fell with the toes facing Chelm. After a while, Reb Selig awoke. Recalling where he was, he jumped up, eager to continue on his journey. "How clever of me," he gloated, "to have had the foresight to place my shoes with their toes pointing toward Warsaw. Now I can't go wrong." And he continued on his journey. Soon he came in sight of the city. Selig hastened his footsteps as he passed through the streets. He couldn't help marveling at the strange appearance of things, at the houses, the streets, and the people. "As I live and breathe," he cried, "Warsaw isn't as big as I expected it to be. Why, it looks exactly like Chelm, like two peas in a pod." He continued on his way, and as he passed the bathhouse, a man sitting at the door greeted him amiably with a "Shalom Alechem." Selig responded with a hearty "Alechem Shalom." "As my name is Selig," he muttered to himself, "this man looks like Fischel, the bathman, way back in Chelm, and the bathhouse looks like ours too. What can it all mean?" Soon he came to the synagogue. "This is an exact copy of ours in Chelm," he thought in surprise. Out of force of habit, he went inside. What he saw there made his hair stand on end. "If I didn't know that I was in Warsaw, I could swear that the people here are all my fellow townsmen," he muttered to himself. And as he stood gaping, the shamus, hurrying by, elbowed him aside and stepped on his corns. "Out of my way!" he cried. "As there's a God in heaven," Selig said to himself, not believing his own senses, "this shamus not only looks like our shamus in Chelm, but even talks and acts like him. Strange, very strange." Reb Selig left the synagogue full of bewilderment. "What can all this mean?" he asked himself anxiously. He was so wrapped up in his thoughts that he did not realize where he was going. Suddenly he looked up and found himself walking on a very familiar street. "So help me God," he cried. "Why, this looks like my own street. So this is Warsaw. What a disappointment! Did I have to go to all this trouble to come here, only to see a street that looks exactly like my own?" In front of a house that also looked like his own, he saw some children rolling hickory nuts into a hole. "May I break hands and feet if that is not my Moishele playing there." At that very moment, a woman stuck her head out of a window and cried, "Selig, why do you stand there right in the middle of the street with your mouth open like an idiot? Come in, dinner is ready." Selig marveled. He could have sworn the woman was like a twin sister of his wife, Leah. Spoke exactly the same way, too. Besides, had she not called him Selig? Indeed, he had to get to the bottom of it all. So he went inside and pretended he was her husband, Selig. Sure enough, the house was furnished just like his own. He sat down to dinner. Just as he had expected, the roast was burnt the same way his wife Leah burned it. "The only conclusion I can come to," finally decided Reb Selig, "is that Warsaw is exactly like Chelm, down to the last detail. True, this is a house that looks like my own, a woman like my wife, and a little boy like my Moishele. And her husband's name is Selig. But I know very well that they are not mine." So Reb Selig sat thoughtfully at table and began to feel very homesick for his own little family in Chelm. "What bothers me, though," he decided finally, "is whether the Warsaw Selig that lives in this house is also exactly like me. I know already that his name is Selig and that he looks like me. The question is, who and where is he? And so Reb Selig, provided he's still living, is waiting to this very day, with characteristic Chelm patience, for the arrival of the other Selig, the Selig of Warsaw. To such lengths do the sages of Chelm go in order to establish the truth. The citizens of Chelm met in council and decided that for a community like theirs, so renowned for its wisdom, it was only fitting that it should have a chief sage. So they elected a chief sage, but to their dismay, nobody seemed to pay any attention to him when he walked out on the street, for he looked like any ordinary Chelm citizen. So they bought him a pair of golden shoes. "Now everybody will know that he is the chief sage," they said. The first day the chief sage put on his golden shoes, a deep mud lay on the streets. In no time at all the mud covered the shoes, and it was impossible to see that they were golden. Therefore nobody knew it was the chief sage. No attention was paid to him. The chief sage did not like to be ignored that way, so he went to complain to the council of sages. "If I don't get some respect quickly, I'll resign," he threatened. "You're perfectly right," the council agreed. "We're going to do something drastic about it. The dignity of our chief sage must be protected." They therefore ordered for him a pair of fine leather shoes to wear over the golden shoes. True enough, when the chief sage went out upon the street, the leather shoes protected the golden shoes from the mud. But since no one got a glimmer of the golden shoes, how could they tell it was the chief sage? So again they paid no attention to him. "It is an outrage!" cried the chief sage. "What's the use of being chief sage if everybody ignores you?" "You're right, absolutely right," agreed the council. "Trust us, we'll do everything to protect your dignity." So they ordered from the shoemaker a new pair of leather shoes for the chief sage. These were to have holes in them. In this way they would protect the golden shoes against the mud, and at the same time would reveal them. Everybody would thus be able to recognize the chief sage. Unfortunately, this plan, too, miscarried. The mud went through the holes and mired the golden shoes, as well as the leather shoes. Therefore, since nobody had any inkling that it was the chief sage, they paid no attention to him, as usual. "This is an outrage!" cried the chief sage. "I'm humiliated, and soon I won't be able to show my face on the street." "When you are mortified, we are mortified too," the council consoled him. "Never fear, we shall do something about it." Thereupon they stuffed the holes in his leather shoes with straw. True, the straw prevented the mud from entering the shoes, but the old trouble was still there. Nobody could get a glimmer of the golden shoes. And again the chief sage passed ignored. This was the last straw. So the sages of Chelm went into solemn council, once and for all to settle the matter. And after long and heated deliberation, they emerged triumphantly with a solution. "Henceforth," they told the chief sage, "you will walk out on the street wearing ordinary leather shoes, but in order that everybody might know that you are the chief sage, you will wear the golden shoes, one on each hand." Although the Jews of Chelm loved their rabbi, he remained aloof from the populace, as a wonder-working rabbi should. They hardly ever saw him. That's why nobody knew for certain whether he had a head or not. One day the rabbi disappeared, and all the people of Chelm went searching for him. They looked high and low, but found no trace of the rabbi. Finally, one searching party found a headless body in the woods. So the sages were sent for. They examined the body carefully, reflecting and reflecting. Then up spoke the chief sage. "This is indeed very puzzling. If the rabbi had a head, then it's clear that this is not his body. On the other hand," another sage took exception, "if the rabbi didn't have a head, then it's certain, as my name is Shabsi, that this is his body." "We must clear up this point," insisted the chief sage. "Let us question the shamus, who always waited on the rabbi." So they called the shamus. "Reb Todros," they asked, "do you know whether our rabbi had a head?" Reb Todros knitted his forehead. He thought, and finally he said, "God preserve us all! I don't know what to tell you. You know what kind of a man our rabbi was. He was always wrapped up in his prayer shawl like the saint he was. Therefore I never saw anything of him but his feet. How should I know whether this is his body?" "Let the bathman be questioned," ordered the chief sage. So the bathman stepped forward. "Tell us, my good man, "Do you know whether our rabbi had a head?" he was asked. The bathman shook his head doubtfully. "For the life of me, I can't tell whether our rabbi had a head or not. The only time I ever saw him was in the steam bath, where he would lie sweating on the topmost bench. When I scourged him with birch twigs, I could only see his backside. So how do you expect me to know whether this is our rabbi?" "This is bad, a very naughty problem indeed," cried the sages. "Let us call on the Rebbitzin," suggested the chief sage. "She should know." "An excellent idea," echoed his colleagues, and they went to see the rabbi's wife. They found her drenched in tears. "What a saint my dear husband was," she lamented. "As a wonder-working rabbi there wasn't his like in the whole world. He himself told me his soul went up to heaven every night." We know all that," the chief sage interrupted her impatiently. "What we would like to know is whether he had a head or not." "A head, did you say?" asked the Rebbitzin, drying her tears. "Now let me think. The only thing I'm certain of is that he had a nose, because he used to take snuff. But whether he had a head or not, only the Lord knows." And so what do you think happened? All Chelm became divided into two hostile camps. One maintained heatedly that the rabbi did have a head. The other just as heatedly argued that he didn't. Now I ask you, what's your opinion?